Hey everybody, Todd here. Welcome back to a Wellness Talks brief. This is the COVID-19 Mental Health Trends edition. Been trying to put these out there every once in a while just to give you a better understanding of what's going on in the minds and the emotional states of other people so that you have something to relate to, as well as give you some of the main trends, the main themes, and of course some tools, 3 of them in this instance, to help you get through this whole COVID-19 challenge that we're dealing with. If you like this, you can always refer back to a few of the other ones. The tools that I'm going over today aren't quite the same as they have been in the past. And of course, stick around until the end where I'm going to walk you through how to tie all 3 of these tools together. And if you haven't done it already, be sure to subscribe to make sure that you get updates as I put them out. So as you may recall, when the whole COVID-19 episode began back early March, possibly even late February, a good number of people just flat out panicked. And maybe they didn't act like they were panicking, but the behaviors indicated otherwise. For instance, if you recall, there was a huge run on toilet paper. And a lot of people thought that this was silly or funny. But if you think about how the human mind works, escape, avoid, control, this makes complete and total sense why a lot of people would go and do this. There was an illusion, there was the expectation, an entitlement, if you will, that tomorrow was going to be like it was today and how it was yesterday. When COVID-19 hit and we started doing all kinds of new things, this schema, this way of seeing the world, this worldview of being entitled, entitlement simply just means expecting that tomorrow will be the same, expecting the same things will occur that have happened in the past. That's the easiest and lightest way to think of entitlement. But when there was a disruption to that, some people panicked, the anxiety got to them, they ran out and tried to stock up on whatever it was they thought that they might need. It's usually milk, eggs, bread, and then toilet paper, because we weren't sure how long we were going to be locked down and what this would actually mean. So it's a control effort. It gives us a certain sense that we actually have something that we can do about it. And of course, once they started taking toilet paper and it was harder to find toilet paper, it made it more difficult for other people who didn't believe in all the nonsense, and they find themselves scrambling just the same because, well, there's only so much toilet paper. Now, some of the other trends that slowly began to develop as the COVID situation settled on us was, how am I going to work from home? It was all schematics. It was all schedules, and everything was just flipped upside down. Of course, our anxiety levels do go up when that happens. And so, like I said, I've given other tools that you could utilize to help when dealing with the ongoing anxiety. And remember, on a scale of 0, no anxiety, to 10, most people typically operate between a 2 and a 3 anyways. It's just part of being alive is anxiety, is helping us to plan for what might be coming. So if we keep that in mind, and COVID ramped that up from a 2 or 3 average to like a 4 or 5 average, maybe a 6. And if you were anxious already, well, then you bumped up even that much more. So the trends then were falling into these short-term things that people could do. Eat more, shop more, sit around and binge watch television shows more, all the things that make us feel good in the short term, but in the long term, they don't end up having any substance to them. And we keep finding that loop. Once we get stuck in that loop, what we were doing initially to cope isn't enough. We got to focus on the values work. We have to focus on what will make our life meaningful, even if the current situation is difficult. And COVID-19 is by all means the definition of something difficult and ongoing, long-term. So we still need to play with that. Some of the recent trends that I've been seeing here in my office are people just floundering a little bit. The schedules, they've been able to come up with a loose schedule, but not quite what they want. And they've let some things go because they don't seem as important anymore. Maybe they're just wearing sweatpants all the time. And so I've talked a little bit about dress like you would go to work, even if you're working at home. We want to put back some of that normalcy. Some of the other trends would be the crazy dreams. Crazy dreams still tend to show up for a lot of folks, especially because we have got more time. Thoughts crashing out of nowhere, thoughts you haven't had for 5, 10, 15 years, depending on how old you actually are. Really vivid thoughts which come crashing back. Getting trapped in a thought, getting hooked by a particular thought, something that you really don't have any control over, the loss of a vacation, the wanting to visit family members, the going to a wedding or a funeral that you cannot go to, and the different emotions and the sensations and thoughts that you have when we fall inside of those thoughts. And so that's what we're going to work on here today, is addressing some of these components and looking for more of the long-term solutions, because the short-term ones, while they are good coping techniques to help us get through something, especially something that's short in duration, acute, if you will, is to look at something that will help us in the long term overall. So what we have then is we're going along living life like we normally would. There's an expectation, there's a certain level of entitlement that all of us carry around, that the world is going to be the way it is. And then one day it isn't. And there's a great book out there called Reality Slap by Russ Harris. And in this book, he talks about, first is the reality slap, COVID-19, closing of schools, closing of businesses, closing of work, out of a job, whatever happens. And then there's the reality gap. And that reality gap is basically what we would like it to actually be, and then what we are experiencing. So in other words, what we want and what actually is. There's the gap in between those things. And we try to figure out different strategies to bridge that gap. And some of them actually work and some of them don't. The hard part here is when the things that we wish that we could do, we can't get to them right now. They're being blocked, and it's outside of our control, it's outside of our business, and there's nothing that we can actually do about it. We can come up with short-term distractions, but ultimately we want to go on that vacation. We want to go and see our family members. We want to go to that restaurant or that bar, wherever it was that you went, but you can't. And a lot of the tools that I'm using inside of here, I do use with people who have been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and talk about a reality slap followed by a reality gap. Doesn't get much more exemplary than that. But these are the tools that work for them, so I know that these tools can work for you, and I've seen it work here plenty of times in my office over and over again. So one thing we can do right here for the reality gap is to just stop and actually pay attention to what actually is. What's happening right now in this present moment. When we stop noticing, when we stop paying attention to that thought, it's easy to get stuck, to get hooked, to get trapped inside of that painful pattern. And then we will react, we will shut down, and we will do those short-term components, those short-term behaviors that in the long run typically make the situation worse. So what we can do is notice what's currently present, what's happening in my body. How do I feel? What's the thought that I keep jumping back to? What's my emotional state? Just simply acknowledging what's going on, connecting to my body, allows me then some distance so that I can engage in a direction that actually matters. So that in a nutshell is a reality gap. That's what's actually happening to us. So what do we do besides the little exercise that I just gave you there inside of that? Well, we can also press pause. Now I have another video which talks about STOP, the STOP acronym. That's step back, take a breath, observe, and then proceed based upon your values. And that's partly what I mean here, but I'm just asking you in this moment to gain some space, to just press pause when you notice that your mind is all into a situation and there's an emotional turmoil happening in your body. So I'm going to go ahead and use this real quick with you right now. Pressing pause on whatever that thought happens to be, I'd like for you to take a moment and notice, bring to mind a situation that brings to heart a strong emotion or an urge. Pay attention to what's actually happening in your body right now when you're in that thought. How does this thought make you behave? How does this thought itself behave? It's pushing you to do something. What is that? Notice that. Now, if we can practice this is leaning into that experience, that situation, and learning how to just connect to the body and how it's showing up, and seeing that there's no real threat there. This allows us space. We can objectify that which we were subjected to. We can see this out in front of us. Once again, why this is important is so that I can actually turn and engage in something that actually matters to me. I can move in a direction that's important, that'll make my life more meaningful. It may not make it more pleasant, at least not in the moment, but in the long term, I'll be able to look back on this moment and be like, yeah, I'm glad that I did what I did. I'm glad that I wore that mask. I'm glad that I was able to help where I could. I'm glad whatever the outcome happened to be, work down the house instead of, there's a lot of things that people are doing that aren't necessarily fun or pleasant, but will be meaningful to us in the long run. And then most importantly is once we're finished pressing pause, stepping back, paying attention to what's going on in our bodies, it then becomes possible for us to then move into a values check. And what I mean by this is that what is the direction that we want to go? Where do we want to move from here? How do we want to make the best of the situation? And not just utilizing those short-term escapes. And not that those are bad in and of themselves. I typically don't like to say this is a good thing and this is a bad thing. It's either this is a useful thing moving me in a direction of what matters to me, so it's a towards move, versus this is a short-term thing which really doesn't move me in the direction of what matters, and so therefore it's an away move. So we want to pay attention to those two components and understand what it is, what our prime values are, our core values. And I ask you to really drill down and to try to find 5 of those. Easiest way to begin to understand what your personal values are is to just simply pick 4 or 5 people that you admire and write down 2 or 3 things about them that you admire. Once you've completed that list, you have a pretty good understanding of what your personal values are, and then you have a direction. Because it's one thing to first just be present and be open and be here. This next thing to be aware of the thought that I keep getting pulled into, but we do need to have an anchor to move towards. That's the importance of values work inside of acceptance and commitment therapy. So what direction are you moving in? And here's a little exercise to play around with that. So I'd like for you to think of a value such as strength or compassion, and pick a goal that aligns with that. So just think about the direction that you want to move. When this is all said and done, I want to be able to look back and know that I stood there and there was a certain sense of strength, or there was a certain sense of unity or community, connection. And in this time, staying connected can be more difficult, and we don't always want to go about it that way. In other words, we want to have a purposeful direction, purposeful steps forward, things that are based in what it is that matters to us, the values that are in front of us, the things that are going to make our lives enriched and more meaningful. What direction are you currently walking in right now? Is there a reality gap? This is essential. This is why all 3 of these things have been tied together. Because if you can do that, what is your next step? What am I going to do next? So you can see, if we go back and take a look at the reality gap, and we are pressing the pause, and we check the values, this is very similar to ACE, which is acknowledging the reality gap. C, connecting to the actual body, which is the pressing pause. And then E, engaging in the values check, moving in that direction. So another quick way to remember all of this is ACE. Become open, become aware, and engage. What's the value? What matters? What's going to make my life 1% better tomorrow? And that movement may not be the most comfortable for us to do right now in this moment. But the bigger question is, are you willing to move in a direction that you know is going to lead to a better tomorrow? Or at the very least, when you look back, you'll be like, I gave my all, I gave it everything to move towards strength. And I came up short many times, but I wouldn't have done it any other way. And so playing around with these things, especially with something like COVID-19, wearing a mask. You may not want to wear the mask, but the reality gap is not wearing this doesn't take into account the different risk factors that we're up against. And 2, at press pause, what's my resistance to this mask? And finally, values check. Why would it be important? Why would it matter that I wear this mask? And there's multiple ways you can actually come to this. I want to protect myself and my family. I want to protect my community. I want to actually be kind to those that I'm actually engaged with because I don't know if I have this or not. And so what I can do is trap it right in front of me so that I'm not spreading it to everybody else. I am my brother, my sister's keeper. That's based upon a value of strength, community, unity, compassion, all of them. But if we don't know what our values are, it makes it much more difficult to move in that direction. So play around with that other little bonus exercise that fell inside of here. Think of people that you admire, figure out what it is that you admire about them, and then re-own those, because those are very much your values. And these are 3 long-term coping exercises to help us move through COVID-19, because it's going to be around for quite a while. So part of it's just press pause, checking what's going on when you hear just that. Look at the actual reality gap between how you want things to be and how things actually are, and then move forward on what actually matters to you the most, like really deeply matters to you the most. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please be sure to subscribe for an update. Eventually, we'll do another 3 coping exercises for the whole COVID-19 situation. So I hope you either subscribe or check back. And until then, may you be well.